You know, when we picture the process of growing up, or I guess stepping into full adulthood, I feel like we almost always visualize it as this process of putting on armor.
Oh, absolutely. It's remarkably similar to a knight getting ready for a campaign.
Right. Like
Mhm.
every single year, you just add a new heavy metal plate.
Yeah.
You take on, a serious career path, maybe a sensible muted wardrobe, the literal and metaphorical weight of a 30-year mortgage.
Yeah, you get progressively weighed down.
You do. And the strange thing is society just stands by and applauds you for carrying all that heavy metal.
Well, because it's entirely framed as a virtue, right? Like we view that accumulation of weight as protective, but we also equate that sheer crushing density with maturity itself.
Exactly.
If you aren't burdened, the assumption is that you simply, well, you haven't grown up yet.
Right. We treat it as this strict binary. You're either armored and serious or you are childish and naive. But what if someone skipped onto that exact same battlefield wearing like a sequin jacket, completely unbothered by the heavy plates everyone else is dragging through the mud?
That is quite the visual.
It is. And today's deep dive is centered on that exact image. So, welcome to the deep dive. We are looking at a short but deeply provocative essay today titled Embrace Your Inner Twink.
And right away, I think that title requires some immediate context because it sets up a very specific expectation that the author is about to just completely subvert.
Right. Yeah, let's establish that baseline. If you're familiar with internet culture or, LGBTQ plus slang, you probably know that the word twink traditionally refers to a very specific physical demographic, usually a young, slim, often hairless gay man.
Right. It's a noun. It describes a physical body type.
Exactly. But our mission today is to explore how this author takes that highly specific slang term and completely re-engineers it. I mean, they elevate it into this profound philosophical meditation on joy, the
Ah.
crushing weight of societal expectations, and really just the fundamental permission to exist without having to prove your utility.
Which is why we need to be clear from the outset. This is not a sociological deep dive into internet subcultures.
No, definitely not.
If you are tuning in for a glossary of modern slang, we are aiming at a different target today. What we are actually examining is an ancient human archetype that the author has cleverly wrapped in this very modern, culturally loaded language. It's a direct challenge to the ways we weigh ourselves down just to be taken seriously.
Okay, let's unpack this right from the top. Because to understand how to embrace this concept, we have to look at how the author actually redefines the title. The essay opens with this really startling framing.
It does, yeah.
It suggests that heaven has been trying to hand you a permission slip for years, but you just keep waving it away because you've decided it belongs to a different body type.
And that phrase, permission slip, it does a lot of structural work there. I mean, a permission slip isn't a degree you earn.
Right, it's not an achievement.
Exactly. It isn't a status you buy. It is simply a document that removes a restriction. The author is basically positing that the restriction is already lifted. The paperwork is sitting right in front of you, but you are the one refusing to sign it.
And then comes the pivot. The text states, and I love this, it says, let it be said plainly, the twink was never only a body type. It is a frequency.
A frequency, yeah, that completely changes the physics of the concept.
It really does. It takes something defined by flesh and bone and turns it into a vibration.
It's a brilliant mechanical shift.
Yeah.
Think about how a frequency operates in actual physics. A radio wave isn't bound by the physical dimensions of the transmitter.
Right.
It exists in the air. It passes effortlessly through solid walls. By detaching this energy from a specific physical form, the author turns it into a universal state of being. You don't have to possess a certain body to tune into a specific frequency. You literally just need the right receiver.
So, how does the author describe tuning into that receiver? Because the text provides this whole cascade of behaviors. It describes this frequency as the part of a person that has never needed to earn its own softness.
Yes.
It skips instead of marching. It flirts with the wind and means nothing serious by it. I think my favorite part is where it says it is glitter that isn't waiting for a special occasion.
Let's look closely at that distinction between skipping and marching, actually, because it highlights the underlying friction perfectly. Marching is, by definition, an engineered movement.
It's very rigid.
Very rigid. It's a vector. It has a specific direction and a specific magnitude, usually dictated by an external authority. Marching is highly productive and uniform. Skipping, on the other hand, is mechanically inefficient.
Oh, totally.
It's just an oscillation of energy that serves no master. It is movement purely for the joy of the movement itself.
That makes me think about how we assign utility to our actions. Like, if we look at the analogy of getting dressed up, usually you put on your most expensive, fanciest tailored clothes because you're going to a gala or a wedding or maybe a job interview.
There's always an objective.
Right. There's a transactional goal.
Hmm.
You want to impress someone or signal your status. But tuning into this frequency, I mean, it's the equivalent of putting on that exact same outfit on a random Tuesday just to sit on your couch.
Yes, precisely.
You completely divorce the action from the outcome. You are wearing it simply because the silk feels good against your skin, you know, not to perform a role for an audience.
And that perfectly illustrates the culmination of that whole paragraph, which is the definition of this energy as the refusal to go dense before your time.
That phrase, the refusal to go dense, that is the one we really need to dissect, because you do feel that density accumulating, don't you?
Oh, absolutely.
As we age, our thoughts get thicker, our schedules get rigid, we absorb the heavy facts of how the real world works.
We do, but the text is arguing that this psychological density isn't like a strict biological imperative, it is a conditioned response.
Right.
In physics, an object's density determines its buoyancy. If you pack an object with enough mass, it sinks. And society constantly hands us heavy things: status anxiety, professional decorum, the need to appear stoic. And it tells us to just pack them into our psyche.
Yeah, just weigh yourself down.
Exactly. So the refusal to go dense is the active choice to remain buoyant.
Which brings up the central conflict of the text. Because maintaining that buoyancy, keeping that light, skipping energy, well, it puts you in direct opposition to a world that endlessly demands we act our age.
Yes, the world wants us to show up in that heavy armor we talked about earlier.
Right, and the author identifies the specific mechanism behind this demand. They call it the demand for gravity. The text argues that somewhere in our cultural development, we all just signed on to this false contract. We internalized the idea that seriousness was the entry fee for being taken seriously.
We really need to look at why that contract exists in the first place. Historically, especially in post-industrial or puritanical frameworks, we developed this whole economy of suffering.
What do you mean by that?
Well, we started equating weight in the body to weight in the soul. We created a psychological model where gravity, meaning heaviness, visible stress, carrying a visible burden, became the only believable evidence of depth or competence.
Oh, I see. It is the metric by which we measure value.
Hmm.
Like if a colleague looks exhausted and stressed out, we assume they are a hard worker.
Right.
But if they look relaxed and joyful while doing the exact same amount of work, we suspect they aren't really taking the job seriously. We demand a performance of suffering to basically validate their output.
Exactly. We use gravity as a proxy for trustworthiness. But the author introduces this really beautiful counter-argument to this societal rule. They write, "Heaven never signed that contract. Heaven has always had a soft spot for the ones who float."
Okay, but let me play devil's advocate for a moment here, because I think this is where the friction really starts for the listener.
Sure, go.
If we reject gravity, don't we run the risk of complete detachment? I mean, gravity is literally what keeps things from flying apart. If you don't take your responsibilities seriously, your family, your finances, your community obligations, you aren't just floating, right? You are being negligent. Doesn't this philosophy risk promoting a completely superficial, detached way of lying?
Yeah, and that is easily the most common defense mechanism against this idea. We just automatically assume that lightness is synonymous with an escape from reality. But look at how the author threads this needle. The text explicitly states that heaven loves the ones who float, not because floating is an escape from the ground, but because the ground was never going anywhere, and joy doesn't have to hold anything down to be real.
Wow, joy doesn't have to hold anything down to be real.
Yes.
That shifts the paradigm entirely.
It really does, because it separates the emotional state from the practical reality. The ground is an objective fact.
The bills exist.
Exactly. The bills exist. The children need to be fed. The author is not advocating for delusion. They are pointing out that you do not need to add an artificial layer of emotional suffering to those realities to make them valid.
I love that.
Your joy doesn't need to function as an anchor. It doesn't need to produce a measurable output or solve a practical problem to be authentic.
So it is basically about dealing with the gravity of the ground without internalizing it into the soul. You can pay the mortgage without making the stress of the mortgage your entire personality.
Precisely. You don't have to perform the heaviness to prove you're handling the reality. And understanding that distinction allows us to ask the next logical question.
Which is?
If floating is an available frequency, why is it so heavily policed? Who actually bears the brunt of society's demand for gravity?
Ah, right. And the essay makes a very sharp pivot here to address exactly that. It states, quote, "This was never about your gender. It was only ever about your permission."
What's fascinating here is when we examine the sociology of this, we see that the demand for gravity is applied incredibly unevenly. The author observes that marginalized groups, but specifically women, carry this floating frequency constantly.
Yeah.
But society almost never offers it to them as a gift.
The text notes that it usually arrives as an accusation.
Let's analyze the mechanics of an accusation for a second. An accusation implies that a rule has been broken, right?
Yeah.
That a crime has basically been committed.
The crime being the refusal to be heavy. The author describes a girl who is too much, too loud, too easily delighted, too willing to be silly. And the key context here is that she is doing all of this in a body that the world had already decided should be serious about being looked at.
That phrase, serious about being looked at, it really exposes the core of the gender dynamic. Society places a visual and behavioral tax on marginalized bodies.
Right.
If you are a woman and you exist in a state of unanchored joy, you are frequently labeled as hysterical or immature or a distraction. The underlying message is that your natural lightness is a liability to the social order.
You are required to perform a rigid, guarded seriousness just to be granted a baseline level of human respect.
Yes.
And the psychological toll of that requirement is just devastating. I mean, the essay describes the result of this conditioning, saying this girl ends up living in exile from her own twink energy her whole life. Living in exile. I mean, she internalizes the accusation. She thinks mistaking her natural buoyancy for a character flaw.
It is a systemic misdiagnosis. Her natural state, the skipping rather than marching we talked about, was pathologized by the culture around her.
She was convinced that her joy was something that needed to be, like, cured or disciplined out of her.
But as the author points out, it was never a flaw. It was a birthright the paperwork simply never reached her for.
She never saw the permission slip because society intercepted it. They basically convinced her it belonged to someone else, someone who wasn't burdened by the expectation to be constantly consumable and serious.
And this tactic of exiling unanchored joy, I mean, it is not a new cultural development. To truly understand the gravity of what we are dealing with, the author zooms out to show us that this is a historical pattern.
Yeah, that brings us to the ancient archetype at the center of this essay, because the struggle to maintain your lightness against the crushing weight of societal expectation, it's as old as human storytelling. The text points out that the energy we are describing is much, much older than the current slang term.
Right. Almost every mythological and cultural tradition has preserved some version of this figure. The author identifies them as the beautiful, unbothered trickster.
The beautiful, unbothered trickster. The defining characteristic of this trickster, according to the text, is that they cannot be pinned into usefulness.
Yes.
And I want you, the listener, to just pause and consider the mechanics of that phrase. Think about how our current society operates. Like, how often do you calculate your right to rest or your overall value as a person based entirely on your output for the day?
Oh, all the time.
Right. If you didn't produce something tangible, if you weren't quote-unquote useful to an employer or a family member, do you feel a sense of guilt?
For the vast majority of people functioning in a modern economy, utility is inextricably linked to self-worth. We demand that every action, every hour, and every person be fundamentally useful.
But the trickster refuses to participate in that economy. The text describes this figure as faintly dangerous, precisely because they refuse to be productive on anyone else's schedule.
And that explains exactly why the system fears this energy so much and tries to crush it with gravity. The system controls people by threatening their status or their livelihood if they aren't productive.
Right.
But a person who refuses to be pinned into usefulness, someone who just doesn't value the heavy armor of societal respect in the first place, well, they are immune to those threats. They operate outside the established leverage of the culture, and that is what makes them faintly dangerous.
Yeah, the essay argues that the modern incarnation of this energy is simply the ancient trickster, wearing this century's clothes. They are unashamed, they are undomesticated, and crucially, the text notes that they are in love with their own reflection.
But the author is very careful to clarify the mechanism of that love. Because, we are culturally conditioned to view anyone who loves their own reflection as vain or narcissistic.
Right, but the text subverts that entirely. It says they love their reflection not from vanity, but from sheer relief that someone is finally looking at them with delight instead of expectation.
That is such a profound psychological distinction. Think about the gaze of the world. When society looks at you, It is almost always assessing you through the lens of expectation.
Yeah.
It is scanning you to see what you can produce, how well you conform to standards, or what gravity you are capable of carrying.
It is an auditing gaze.
Exactly. It is an audit. So to look in the mirror and view yourself with pure delight, to just be thrilled that you exist without auditing your utility or your flaws, is a radical break from that cycle.
Delight instead of expectation. If you can master that, you effectively
Yes.
neutralize the demand for gravity.
So how does the author suggest we actually implement this? Because the essay doesn't just leave us with theory, right? It provides a framework for integrating this frequency into daily life.
It does.
Hmm.
And it is a framework built on subtraction rather than addition, which I find really interesting.
Yeah.
Embracing this energy isn't about changing who you fundamentally are. It is about stopping the performance of a gravity you don't actually feel.
Right.
The text gives us several clear directives. It says, let the wrist go loose. Let the laugh come out too big for the room it's in.
In other words, stop calculating the acoustic footprint of your joy just to ensure it doesn't disturb the seriousness of the space.
Oh, that's a great way to put it. It tells us to let the body enjoy its own decoration without needing that enjoyment to justify itself. Let desire stay playful before it ever turns transactional.
The word transactional is the linchpin there, I think. We are deeply conditioned to turn our interactions into trades, like, I will offer you my stoicism if you offer me respect.
Right.
The directive here is to allow desire and joy to exist as pure play without needing it to culminate in a transaction.
And perhaps the most reassuring directive of all, let softness and strength finally share a bed instead of competing for the last word. You do not have to abandon your resilience or your capabilities to tune into this frequency. You can be someone who handles the reality of the ground while simultaneously maintaining your lightness.
And the author synthesizes all of these directives into one concluding realization. It all comes back to that permission slip from the beginning.
Right.
The text states, you do not have to change your body to let this in.
You only have to stop guarding the door.
Stop guarding the door. We spend so much energy acting as the bouncer to our own psyche, just aggressively turning away our natural lightness because we are convinced it violates the strict dress code of adulthood.
Letting go of that guard duty is a remarkably liberating concept. But, as we synthesize all of this, I keep finding myself circling back to the idea of the trickster, that unbothered, faintly dangerous energy that refuses to be pinned into usefulness.
Well, it is the thread that ties the entire philosophy to the real world. We established that this unanchored joy is faintly dangerous to the immediate social order because it cannot be leveraged or controlled.
Right.
But if we scale that concept up, it raises a rather staggering question. Think about the macro structures that dictate our daily lives. So much of our economy, our marketing, our corporate hierarchies, they are entirely reliant on our anxiety.
Completely.
The system functions because we are insecure, because we feel the constant crushing need to perform gravity and prove our worth through endless productivity.
Yeah, it is an economy fueled by the fear of being seen as unserious.
Exactly. So what would happen if a critical mass of people simply decided to stop guarding the door? If we collectively stopped performing that false gravity and embraced unapologetic, non-transactional joy.
Wow.
If we refuse to be pinned into usefulness, the fundamental machinery of that anxiety-based economy might actually begin to break down. Could radical silliness, the act of skipping instead of marching, could it actually be the ultimate form of social defiance?
That reframes the entire concept. It suggests that choosing to take off the heavy armor isn't just a matter of personal relief, It is an act of rebellion against a system that profits from your density. So next time you feel the overwhelming pressure to put on all that heavy metal just to prove you belong on the battlefield, maybe try putting on the sequin jacket instead. Let the laugh be too big for the room. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We will catch you next time.